New at 5, a Utah nonprofit is taking aim at a Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship by suing the federal government.
It's the latest threat to Native Hawaiian programs. Our Mahealani Richardson has the latest.
Salt Lake City, Utah nonprofit Do No Harm is suing the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, claiming its Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship program is, quote, blatantly illegal discrimination. Applicants must attest to and prove their Native Hawaiian ancestry. If they don't check this racial box, they are foreclosed from even submitting an application. According to its 2024 tax filing, Edward Bloom was on its board of directors. He founded Virginia-based Students for Fair Admissions, which is suing Kamehameha Schools over its Hawaiians preference admissions policy.
My reaction to that lawsuit, which I consider frivolous, as well as any lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Native Hawaiian programs, should be vehemently opposed.
City Council floor leader Esther Kia'aina says these lawsuits and threats to other Native Hawaiian programs are related.
Should the U.S. Supreme Court receive a court case challenging the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act or the Office of Hawaiian Affairs or the Native Hawaiian Education Act or the Native Hawaiian Health Care Act, I'm concerned that they will strike it down. I feel that it's even more important that we have Native Hawaiian leaders who step up to the plate to help in galvanizing an overall strategy to deal with the issue.
Kia'aina served in the Obama administration and believes it's critical to establish a government-to-government relationship.
I believe the Congress has over hundreds of statutes affirm that there is a trust relationship or political relationship between Native Hawaiians and the federal government.
On its website, nonprofit Papa'olelo Kahi says its 35-year-old Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship program stands tall and has awarded nearly 360 scholarships. Its CEO said, quote, efforts to dismantle programs like this ignore both the historical context and the ongoing need to safeguard equitable access to care throughout Hawaii. These scholars represent the next generation of healers for our communities, a presence that uplifts the health of all. Mahealani Richardson, Hawaii News Now.